Good morning, everyone. It's still dark here, um, so it's early in the morning. Uh, this video and that you're watching right now, if you're an aspiring writer or just beginning and so forth, or want to be a writer, uh, this is the most important video that you're going to ever watch. It's not that there are others better; there are others that are probably a lot better, but this is the one you're going to remember. My name is Byron Lehman. This is the Jittery Goat YouTube channel. I also have a website. It's the Jittery Goat at jitteryg.com. There's where you'll find my short stories, and you'll also find links to my novels. So here's my starting out advice for writers. This is very simple. Write. Start writing. Just don't say, I'd like to be a writer. Just say, well, it's about time I start writing. So if you're a writer, you probably have an idea for a story or a couple of ideas for a story. So start writing them down. Start writing the writing process. So sometimes you need, an individual might need help with it. Sometimes stories are easy to come up with. I'm going to help you come up with a story. All stories are character driven. Okay, they have to have a character. So think of your main character. Describe him in your mind or describe him on paper. Somebody you really like. Okay, a main character. And your main character wants something. That's up to you, whatever they want. Think about them. You know your character. They want something, and something or someone stands in their way. Okay, that's your story. And write about how this all takes place and about the resolution, how it comes out good for your protagonist. So start writing. So you're writing this story, and you work hard at it, and it doesn't have to be very long. I'm suggesting 1,000 or 2,000 words at the most. And during that process, that you have not only you have dialogue and you have description and you have all the things that make up a short story. You go over it, you edit it, you look at it, you make it the best that you can possibly make it, make sense to you. After that, hit save. Make sure that you title it. Don't say untitled number 73 or something like that, but title it and just put it away. Oh, if you put it on a hard copy, run it off in your printer, just take it and throw it in a drawer, forget about it for a while. The next step that you'll want to do is go to Barnes and Noble or someplace like that, a large bookstore, where they have a magazine rack and lots of magazines, and look for either the one of two or both of these magazines, The Writer and Writer's Digest. They're both excellent. I read Writer's Digest for years, and a lot of good suggestions in there, and you get the vibe of what it's like to be a writer. And that's important, and that gives you tips on writing, and you'll absorb those things. So get a couple issues. In fact, you can go online and get those magazines if you want to, and you can read them off your tablet or your laptop or whatever you have. And you can even get back issues, something you want to read about, but put a couple weeks into it, get absorbed in it a little bit. Go back to that bookstore, buy yourself a book about writing. Writing fiction, and I'm assuming that's what you'll want to buy, what you're going to do. And so and it teaches you, they'll teach you plot development and character development and things like that, how to formulate a story, how to write and so forth. So read that book and kind of get the idea, get the vibe from it. And the next thing you do is go and get another book. And this book is called Elements of Style, written by, I think, William T. Strunk is the guy's name. From the early 1900s, I think he was a professor at Harvard, and he wrote this very short book on how to write. And he has such good writing advice in there. No writer would want to write without reading that book first. Every writer I know, I ask them if they have that book. And they said, yeah, they have it, and they refer to it quite often. It's just a good book to refer to and to read. It just takes a couple hours to read it. I read where once it was so short that E.B. White, the writer E.B. White, had to write the introduction and make it over 100 pages. So that tells you how short it is. Just good advice. Now, I went to Goodreads, which is kind of interesting, and to see how it was rated, and it was a 4-star out of 5. And I suspect that the people who didn't get a 5-star were people that book insulted. In other words, all the mistakes that book said that writers make, those people were making those mistakes. And anyway, it's just a good book to read. So now that you've done all that, you've absorbed yourself in them, and you've taken about a month or 6 weeks to do all that. In the meantime, you want to come out other ideas with stories. Write them down. Okay, write that down. You got ideas for stories. You've read those books. Remember that story that you wrote and you saved in your hard drive or you tucked away in a drawer? Go back and get it. Read it and rewrite it. Make sure it's the very best story you can get, okay, that you can write. And you say, well, that's good. That's pretty good. I like that. The next thing you want to do is get this book, and you can find it again at Barnes & Nobles. I think you can. Yeah, you probably can, or they can order it for you. Or again, you can go to Amazon and get it. It's called The Writer's Market. And it's a very thick book. It has all the magazines and journals and literary journals and so forth that you can send your short story into. It gives you the writer's guidelines and for submission and so forth. And you look through that and you find out the magazine that you're comfortable with, that you think your story will fit. Send it in. Okay. So now that's a long process. Well, I shouldn't say really long. It's a month or two, and somewhere in between. They're going to take a look at it, and invariably they're going to look at just the first couple of paragraphs, and they can kind of tell whether it's going to be a good story or not from that. And because their reader is going to take a look at the first couple paragraphs and decide whether they like it or not. And they can tell a good story from a bad right from the get-go, or from their opinion anyway. So you're waiting while they're doing that process, and like I said, it could take a couple months. You can write some more, okay, and write some other stories, but keep yourself writing. That's important. Writers write. And so in the meantime, find some place to write. Find some place to write for somebody else. And during that process, here comes a letter back from who you sent the short story into. Likely it's going to be rejection your first time. What you're looking for is a little note. If they take the time to write something, it means that they're interested in it, or has piqued their interest a little bit. If not, they're just going to wrap it up and send it back. And that's not for us, period. But if they take the time to handwrite something, you're pretty close. Either you can let it like it is, send it to someone else, send it to someone else, send it to someone else. You'll find somebody. Or you can take a look at it, a critical look at it, and say, well, what didn't they like about it? Rewrite it and send it back to them again. Okay? And they might like it the second time, but it's going to be a long process. If you're really interested in being a writer, it's going to take a while, and pretty soon you're going to find that you'll know what it takes to write a good story. So while you're waiting, you got to find someone else to write for. That's important, to write for someone else. So where do you go for that? Well, there's always community newspapers that are looking for fillers. They're looking for somebody to write something. If you come up with some sort of idea for writing something, write it and give it to them and say, could you? Is this something you'd be interested in? Likely, they're if it's well written, they're going to accept it, because they want things in there. They need things in these newspapers, or in these community newspapers, or advertisers. So find a community newspaper, an advertiser, something like that. See if there's something that you can write for them. Likely, they won't pay you a dime, but they might. They might pay you a couple bucks. A second source is newsletters. sometimes the people that you do business with will put out a monthly or a quarterly newsletter. It helps them to keep in contact with their customer and let them know what's going on and keep customers coming back. That's important for them. And usually the owner of the business or the manager or whoever's assigned to do the newsletter, they don't want to do it. It's too much work for them. It's usually sometimes work they have to take home at night. But try to find a newsletter and see if you can write something for them. But it's important that you write for somebody else. Now, if you're a student, volunteer something for your school newspaper, or if you're a college student, the same way your college newspaper. If there's some other paper, some other journal around in the school or the college, see if you can write for them. But find somebody to write for. It's good to do that. In fact, Hemingway started out not as a novelist or a short story writer. He started out writing for a newspaper. So what that does, that gets you writing, it gets you organizing your thoughts, and it gets you to learning really what good writing is, because people will respond to it and so forth. I'm going to share with you an experience that I had when it came to writing. Of course, I always wrote a little bit, but in the 90s, I think it was early 90s, I was a machinist at a shop, and my company decided to start a plant newspaper or newsletter, and 300 to 500 people work there at a given time, and actually, I think the human resources director contacted me and asked me if I'd like to write for him. I said, sure, I'd like to. I like to be on the staff and writing. And so here I was a machinist, and I was writing for this newsletter. And I'm going to say right to begin with, it was a very rewarding experience that I had. And I really suggest that everyone do something like that. And so I remember the first article I wrote was just simply, everybody's had these Sony Walkmans where they were allowing us to have them so we could listen to music while we run our machines, because sometimes it could be very tedious and boring. And so I wrote an article about different types of music that you would listen to, and I would say that the shop is rock and roll. However, we want to be taken away from the shop. We'd like to listen to something else, and sometimes classical music or jazz can fill that gap, can take us away from the shop, which is sometimes where we wanted to be. And it's amazing how many of these guys are, guys with slip foreheads and hairy knuckles, metaphorically speaking, began to like jazz and classical music, all just because of a brief article. And I remember the next article I wrote was my wife and I, we went on vacation. We went to Maine, and we went to this little restaurant in Bath, Maine. And I wrote all about the restaurant, but the important thing was I wanted to get to this point about this incredible raspberry butter that they had with their waffles or pancakes. It was just delicious. And so I wrote all about this little restaurant, and I added the recipe to that raspberry jelly or raspberry butter. And people read it, or some of their wives tried it, and it was a lot of fun because you know what you're writing is moving people to some sort of action. And it was a great experience, but there was one experience I'd like to share with you, which really kind of codified everything for me as a writer and just this newsletter. Like I said, the editor of the newspaper was the human resources director, and he was a really pretty good writer too, and he gave me a wide berth. I oftentimes had an opportunity of writing fiction, and that's kind of tough to do in a newsletter because you're maybe 200-300 words is about all they can give you. And so I did write this story once about a little dog I had when I was a little boy. I won't go into this story, but a fellow came around to my machine shortly after the issue came out, and he had a reputation of being kind of a rough guy and so forth. And so he comes up to me on my machine. He says, he said, I like that story. And he started telling me about his little dog that he had when he was a little boy. And as I looked at him, I could see like his eyes were glassing over. They were tearing up. And he said, "I'm really glad. I'm glad you wrote that story." And I remember I said, "Oh, I'm glad you read it." He said, "Okay." Yeah. And he walks away. As a writer, I mean, it doesn't get any better. It really doesn't. Um, you touch some person that is probably doesn't read anything more than instructions how to put together a chainsaw or something. I don't know, but uh, when you touch someone, it touches you. So it's important that you find some place to write. And when you find some place to write, you begin to touch people and move people in ways that you never thought possible before. And that's the beauty of writing, I think, sometimes, of writing good things. So my advice is keep writing. Write, write, write. Find a place to write. Okay? And that's my advice. So remember to do good stuff, read good stuff, write good stuff, and above all, see good stuff in others. We'll see you next time, and thanks for stopping by.